So, Owen, thanks so much for joining us at Audible to chat.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here. You got the best mics.
And the best lanyards, apparently.
Best everything. I'm a big Audible fan myself.
Are you?
Because I do a lot of driving. So I just pop on something.
Well, I was going to go straight in and ask about Highfire, but now I want to ask what you like listening to.
Well, I like listening to Michael Connolly a lot. I listen to them once for the story, but then I analyse them the second time around. I say, how did this guy construct such a great thriller? So usually I have 2 listens to whatever I buy. So Michael Connolly is my latest guy. So I listen to every book he has on Audible.
Every book twice?
Twice.
Wow, that's commitment.
Once for enjoyment and then the other time squinting at the radio to see how he did it. So it's like trying to analyse a magician's tricks. I don't know yet, obviously, because I'm on the second listen and I don't know how he does it, but he's really good writer.
Have you picked up anything that you apply to?
Well, he has multiple strands all the time. So, and then a lot of things that seem to be unconnected all come together at the end. But yeah, it takes a really good writer to keep juggling all those balls in the air and keep them all interesting. Because often when you do that, the reader just wants to get back to the first one because that was really good. And this one is just boring me and I want this guy back. But he manages to sustain the intrigue in all his situations, which is very clever.
So we will move on to talking about your new book, which I will say does have lots of intrigue in that it has a very intriguing bunch of characters, including Vern the Dragon. So your book is Highfire.
Yes.
So introduce us to it. Tell me a bit about it.
Highfire is kind of a realistic magical fantasy, it's actually, the phrase I'm using is dragon noir. So it's about a dragon, the last dragon who lives in Louisiana in the bayou on an island called Boar Island, which is in the Honey Island swamp. And he, as far as he knows, he's the last dragon. Now, you may have in your mind an image of a dragon being a noble, airborne creature that sleeps on a bed of gold and occasionally decimates villages. But Vern is not really like that. He's kind of a slacker dragon. He wears cargo shorts, drinks a lot of vodka, watches Netflix all the time, and is very disdainful of how dragons are portrayed because he thinks, they're a lot different to that. And he's very happy living out there. He's been there for a couple of 100 years. He hangs out with the alligators. But then one night he comes across this reprobate, delinquent boy called Squid Moreau, who has got himself into quite a pickle. And Vern thinks this particular pickle might overflow into his shack, so he decides he's going to kill this guy because he hates humans. They've killed his whole family. But then, as teenagers do, Squib grows on Vern, and they end up becoming kind of partners, with Squib running down to the village to get Vern his vodka and his latest ketogenic diet pack. So it's kind of funny. I think it's very funny, but it's also darkly funny. And the guy reading it on Audible is fantastic.
Yeah, the accent is amazing.
Yeah. I thought it was a bit weird, but then I have it on double speed. Let me slow that down. Oh, that's great. But,
he talks at a good pace.
Yeah. Some people you have to speed up a little bit, but this guy has the gravel. You don't have to. He's great.
And so when you were writing Vern the Dragon, and like you say, not your conventional dragon, what elements were you thinking about you wanted to include in his personality?
I wanted to humanize him. So he's like just a guy. But I wanted him to be not focused. Dragons tend to be really obsessive when we see them. They either want gold or they just want to burn everything. They're very regal. And I didn't want him to have any of that. So he has no sense of purpose. He just wants to eat Netflix his day away, have a few cocktails at the end of the day. He just hangs out. He lies in the swamps with the gators. So there's nothing. He has no aim in life except just to survive, to be alive. But then when he finds a friend, that gives him purpose. And he breaks all his own rules and comes out of the swamp to save Squib when Squib's in trouble.
And with Squib, what were you thinking about when you were making him as a character?
I was thinking about Huckleberry Finn.
Right.
So in my mind, Squib is like a descendant of Huckleberry Finn. He's the modern version. Where Huck Finn was on the Mississippi on his raft, Squib is on the Honey Island River, the Pearl River, on his little canoe with his catfish traps and his crawfish traps, and he's just eking out a living. He doesn't like going to school like Huck Finn. He doesn't smoke a pipe. Huck Finn did that, but I think he's a spiritual descendant. So he's a tearaway boy, but he definitely has a massive heart of gold because everything is geared to keeping his mother safe and happy. Even though it's his mother who keeps him safe and happy, he thinks he's very old-fashioned and he thinks you need to have a man in the house, and that's him. But really, his mum is the boss. But he's a sweetheart, really, but he's a bit misguided. So Vern steps in and gives him very direct guidance, like, do this or I will kill you immediately. So he goes, oh, I think I'll just do that then. That would be the choice. So yeah, I really like Squib. And as a matter of fact, the book started out as a children's book. And in many ways, it still has that classic structure of tearaway boy meets grumpy old guy and they heal each other. But I just added in some swearing, explosions and vodka.
Yeah, and a villain, quite like a villainous villain.
I do think he's one of my finest creations, Regents Hook. And my wife said to me, where did you get that name, Regents? That's a great name. And I said, whoa, it's that show, Regents and Kathy Lee. And she said, no, idiot, that's Regis. And I said, oh, well, then I invented a name. So I'm delighted now. I presume there is a name called Regents, but Regents Hook just has that, like Sherlock Holmes, 2 syllables, one, that just rolls off the tongue. And so, yeah. What I like about Regents is that he's the best bad guy, because first of all, he's a lawman, so he's supposed to be a good guy. But second of all, most bad guys think they're the good guy in their own story. But Regents absolutely knows, I am the bad guy. And he has no belief in an afterlife, and if there is an afterlife, he knows he's already going to hell. So he's really committed to being the bad guy and doing whatever it takes. And he knows that eventually his luck will run out and he'll be killed. But he's fine. He's just going to make hay while the sun shines and be as bad as he needs to be to get what he has to have. And what he needs is Vern, because Vern, he feels if he can ensnare Vern and use his talents, that he can take over a crime gang in New Orleans. So that's what happens to poor Vern. He gets dragged into the New Orleans underworld. And
you've said before that you do take inspiration from friends, family, people around you, from characters. What did you draw out from people to put into the bunch of characters in this book?
Well, I think Squib is very much based in my son Finn. He's just a very instinctive guy, very athletic, very graceful, but he just operates on his wits. And he's so clever and street smart that he manages to succeed a lot of the time. And my son Finn is quite like that. He just always manages. And it's very irritating as a father, because you're telling him, this is not going to work. If you don't study, that is not going to... And then he comes back, it worked, father. He says, get used to it. This is just... I'm lucky, and that happens. And, so you're torn between being delighted that he succeeded, but also wishing he'd study. So as for Regents, please God, I don't know anybody who's anything like that.
Good to know.
Yeah, it's just he's like the worst of all bad guys. But what I really like about him, all the bad guys I've ever liked have that dark sense of humor, whether it's Hannibal Lecter from the original book, which is Thomas Harris, which is like a masterclass on how to write a thriller of that kind, to Captain Hook in Peter Pan, who I gave him the name Hook as kind of a homage to Captain Hook, and who I think is one of the finest villains ever to grace fiction. So I do inspiration from all these guys. So I knew I wanted them to be very clever, very dark, and very funny, and then just let my imagination run away from it with it. And as regards Vern, I don't know where that came from. The grumpy old man. It's probably me if I now that I think about it. I am quite grumpy. I save all this happiness for interviews, but as soon as I go home, that gets ripped off like I'm in V, and it's just Scrooge underneath. So that's probably where the dragon came from.
Do you share any of his taste in beverages or television?
I do. All the television he loves, I love.
Right.
So there's a lot of mentions of Highlander, these 1980s sci-fi fantasy movies that I really like. Lord of the Rings, all the stuff he watches on TV, I would have watched. I don't watch as much Trailer Park Boys as Vern does, but I have definitely watched that. And music-wise, we listen to the same. Now that I think of it, oh my God, I'm a dragon. I am the dragon. You've made me see that. So,
I suspected. But
I might be just silent for a moment while I reflect on that. I'm a miserable person.
I don't think Vern's miserable.
Thank you. I'm a lovely person. Depression over.
Sorted.
Sorted.
And so we're in Louisiana for this book. Why Louisiana? Why did you pick that?
I don't know. I have never been to Louisiana, and in some ways, I like that challenge. Sometimes that challenge works. If you're in an office, my office now is about half the size of this room, and it's a beautiful office, but you're still in that room for 9 or 10 months on your own. So you have to be interested while you're in there. And one of the things that keeps me interested is a mad challenge. And one time I wrote a Doctor Who book, having never watched an episode of Doctor Who, because I thought that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
And it was not good. My friend said to me, you know that Doctor Who book you wrote? And I was like, yeah. He said, that was the best Star Trek book I ever read. I said, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I will try harder next time. So now my challenge with this is, can I make this sound real from research? Because I love doing research. And I had done several books on Victorian London, which obviously I couldn't visit. So the research worked there. So I thought if I just try a little bit harder, let's just see if I can do it. So I did a few chapters and I left them for a while. And then I came back to them and said, yeah, that's believable. The thing about research is you can't pile it on. You have to just seed it through, just a line here and there. Don't overdo it, or it reads like capital research. It's exposition time. This guy spent some time on the internet and now he's going to tell you. So you don't want to do that. You have to turn it into prose. So yeah, after a lot of work, I think, and luckily one of the editors in America, the American copy editors, was from that area, just completely by chance, and she was able to keep me honest. Or say, yeah, I totally believe this, or that we never say that. And that was extremely helpful.
Was the dialect and accent sort of tricky to think in?
Yeah, but I watched it. Bavern is in that swamp because there's a legend, a real legend. Well, it's a legend, but it's a legend that exists. I didn't make it up, about the Honey Island monster, where this circus train crashes into the Pearl River in the 1940s. This actually happened. And a gorilla escaped. That actually happened. And then the gorilla was probably eaten by alligators. That's what happened. But the legend says the gorilla married an alligator. Obviously, they're both Christians. And they had a baby monster. And this is the Honey Island monster.
Right.
And that legend persists. It's like we have the legend of the Banshee. Over here, you've got Nessie in Loch Ness, whatever. So these legends do persist all around the world. There were actual trips devoted to like Honey Island monster tours. So these were all videoed and documented. So I had hours and hours of footage of guys who were from the area and had spent their lives hunting for this monster and written books about it, talking about this. So it was like gold dust for me. So I thought, how annoyed would you be if you were a dragon and everybody thought you were like a hybrid gorilla alligator? That would really annoy you. So Vern is constantly being fed up by these comparisons, but also it's quite handy because if he is spotted by a tourist, the tourist goes back and says, oh, I saw a monster, and everyone goes, yeah, of course you did. Honey Island monster, was it half gorilla, half alligator? And no one would believe that. So in a way, he makes it work to his advantage.
I love that element of him saying that, I just thought I'd hang out amongst the alligators because people will get confused.
Yeah. In my mind, that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
I'm out in my office going, yeah, the whole world is going to love this crazy idea. So sometimes it's better to isolate yourself and not think about the general reaction and just write the story.
Yeah. And so talking of stories that, have had a great general reaction over the years, Artemis Fowl, which is now being made into a film.
That's great. That has enabled me to take risks on books like Highfire. And I did a play last year with a turkey puppet, which that might seem a risk, but because I have this cushion of this massive selling series that's still selling loads, and now it's been a movie, I can make decisions that are not based on mortgage or schools, which is really a privileged place to be in. It's lovely because my only choice is what do I think is a good idea, interesting idea, and an artistic idea. And funnily, I chose the Talking Dragon. That was the one of all the ideas I had. Oh, Talking Dragon.
So how long has this idea been in the works?
I've had the idea of the character for about 4 or 5 years. But I wrote the book last year, and once I started writing it, it went quite quickly, because it's kind of a breakneck pace, the whole thing. Once you get past the first chapter, which tells you about the characters, then after that it's just straight all the way downhill. So 5 or 6 months work, and then I did one major edit, and then just after that it was just a copy edit. So yeah, it came out pretty intact. I lost one passage, but after that it was pretty intact, and I was very lucky to get Joe Fletcher, who's the legendary Joe Fletcher, who's published a lot of things, Discworld novels, all sorts of things. So I was lucky to get her on board, and she was able to really help me improve it tone-wise and shape-wise.
And of course, this isn't your first thing that you've written adult fantasy, because of one of the many things you've written, the 6th book of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I was hoping everyone had forgotten that.
I'd not, sorry.
No.
What was that like?
It was very strange. I'm even now I'm not sure how I feel about that book. I mean, it did really well. It got great reviews, but it was hard to say no to that, because I'm such a huge fan of Douglas Adams. And if I often say to people, look, if you were a musician and Paul McCartney shoved his head in the door and said, listen, we're putting a band back together, would you play, lead guitar? Most lead guitarists would say, yeah, I will. So it was like that. I mean, initially I was like, oh no, no one should do that. But then I gave in and did it, and it was a very strange thing. I mean, I don't think of it as like the end of that series. I think of it as a authorized fan fiction. That really, and I think I'd be lovely to see someone else doing one in a few years, and just to keep Douglas's work to the forefront of British sci-fi, because he was a genius, and he was very, very innovative and unique, actually. So I was delighted to have. I felt like I designed a T-shirt or something, and you can buy this too, but it's not one of the 5 books, but you might enjoy it if you enjoy that. So the internet had mixed feelings about it.
The internet has mixed feelings about everything.
I felt, though, that like a lot of the mixed feeling people banded together on that. But
they do.
You know what? We finally agree on something. Let's go after this guy. So, but then all the Artemis Fowl fans came to my defense. So there was a lot of them. So thanks, guys.
And how do you feel about the Artemis Fowl fans, who a lot of them now will have grown up and be the right age to read Highfire? How's that sort of feel?
It's my cunning plan.
Obviously.
No, it's great. It's a nice way to keep in touch with those guys. And we did our first signing yesterday, and it was all Artemis Fowl fans, who are in their 20s now, 30s. And they're delighted to have something adult to read. And then they're going to read it and go, this is just like his other stuff, but swearing. Yeah. So, but no, it's great. It's nice. And you see people who have kids now, and the kids are reading Artemis Fowl and they're reading Highfire. So I'm just getting the whole family in there. It's like I am like a literary version of McDonald's. I just want everyone in those doors. That's fine. I'm kidding. I care about the standard. On doing quite well out of the product that you're making. So I was reading about when you first started writing children's books, you didn't seek out an agent initially, that your family encouraged you to do that when you'd written Artemis. So why was it that you didn't go out straight away and think, I want an agent for these things that I'm writing? I just don't know. This was back in 2008 or whatever when I started, and we didn't really have internet then, and you don't know what to do. So you have to ring up someone and say, what do you do if you have a book you want to... So I went down to the bookstore and I looked at the back of the books I like and found out who that publisher was, and then sent the book, which you had to print out. And in those days, you won't remember this, but the printers were all the pages were joined up. So you had to tear off all the pages, and there was little perforated things on the sides. So it took ages, and it was very expensive. So you would send out maybe 2 copies of your book and just wait for them to come back, because then you would have to use the same copies. And if you didn't put it in the stamped address envelope, they wouldn't send it back. So it was a much more difficult thing to do. And it took months. So I didn't get an agent because I didn't know you needed one. And then when I got an Irish publisher, I thought, I don't want to upset the publisher now. I've got a deal. If I get an agent, it might be just too much trouble. You don't have any faith in yourself or your work. You think, if I just annoy one person, they just will not publish me anymore. But when Jackie read Artemis, she said, right, get yourself an agent now. And that was so much better thing for her to say than I love this, because it was such a validation. Okay, get an agent. And that was much better than I love this, So I did, and I got a great. I was very lucky. I rang an agency, Ed Victor Limited, the famous Ed Victor agency, because I had read somewhere that if you're going to go for an agent, you need to ring them and tell them you're sending it in and whose name specifically should you put on this kind of book, which I'm sure agencies around the world are just so sick that ever got out, because all they're doing is answering phone calls from. But the girl who answered, who was the assistant to the agent, was Irish. So I went like full leprechaun. I'd be, Jesus, how are you, Mrs.? But I know your cousins. And it was like pathetic. But she thought I was pathetically amusing a little bit. So Grania, who is now a New York high-flying agent herself, she said, well, listen, my agent, or I'm the assistant to this agent, Sophie Hicks. She takes one book on holidays. And because you're obviously very needy and sad, I will give her your book and we'll see what happens. And Sophie read it and signed me up, and that was it. And within a few weeks, we had like book deals in America and UK and a film deal. So that really changed my life very quickly. Having done 6 books that did well in Ireland, to going like immediately, the next book was #1 in the New York Times, I still find that incredible, that happened. I remember getting a big plaque for 100 weeks on the New York Times. I was like, that's someone else. That can't be me. But it was, at its height, Artemis Fowl was really popular, and now it's gone back again because of the movies. But I've had a nice run. Every year I say to my wife, this is probably the last year I'll be touring, because I'm sure someone will find out that they're all shite, and then I won't have to go out anymore. But it's 20 years later, and it's still going. So I think a lot of writers, I don't want to overstate it, but we kind of feel like frauds a lot of the time, that we don't know how anyone is still buying any of this. And it's, but then we alternate between that and thinking we're the best writers that have ever been born, so.
You've got to have a little bit of that to keep going, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think when you're in a room on your own for a year, you just go through the gamut of all these insecurities. And then when the book comes out and everybody has an opinion on it, that's quite hard. So I tend to back off all social media and like invent this little bubble. I tell the public, just send me the nice reviews and just cut out if they say anything negative, just cut that. And if it's a B at the end, just use a highlighter and change it to an A. That's fine. Most people are told, like all you guys here are probably told, right? At one point in your life, you were told, right, it's time to grow up now. You're not a child. You can't be messing around on skateboards in the park anymore. Go get a job. You have to study for your exams. I am told, stay childish. Do not engage with any adult. Think about leprechauns and dragons and put that on a page. It's fantastic, but it is a bubble. I know that.
And will you be writing more Vern? Will you be writing more dragons?
I'd love to do another Vern or two. I'll see how it goes. At the moment, I don't plan that far ahead. At the moment, I'm doing another Fowl Twins book. First one was such a blast. I like theatre a lot, so I have a play coming in May. So I'll see how that goes. That's going on tour. I love musical theatre, so I'd love to do another musical. I went to see a few while I was in London. They're so great. So, and again, the Artemis Fowl gives me that buffer where I can say to there's a friend of mine who's an arranger and a composer. I'm like, let's do a musical about 1970s glam rock, because everybody loves that. And he's like, okay. But we'll try and do it, why not? And the nice thing, again, is that I can ring people and they will take that call. Like if I rang Oliver Jeffers or PJ Lynch, and they will answer the phone and they will listen to my idea. So it's nice to be able to get through to people like that, which is a very privileged position. But it's that's one thing I certainly like about having a successful series, is that you have access to people. So yeah, I continue to exploit that for as long as I can.
Brilliant. Well, Eoin, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I think you may have found out more than you needed or wanted to know.
Oh no, I think all info is good info. Yeah, so, well, I'll happily take it. Oh. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.